Hello, hi, welcome. I am Nelufar Hedayat, and this is Doha Debates on Twitter Spaces, our very first conversation and foray into Twitter Spaces. Stick with me because we're going to have a really interesting conversation. But first, a little bit about why we're doing this, who we are, and what exactly is going on. We're trying to create a space here at Doha Debates, a regular space, one that everyone can come and join and participate in, one of respectful debate. Okay, this isn't going to be a space where you see adversarial conversations. There aren't even going to be any winners or losers in this debate. More so, I want this to be an opportunity for us to discuss different perspectives, to try and increase understanding, and to have constructive conversations that lead us somewhere, right? I've had too many debates, discussions on social media and in real life that just have people going at one another with no consensus. And that's exactly what we're not trying to do. I'm going to be hanging back. I'm going to be leaving room for Julie Bindel and Kayandi Andrews to express themselves and to really present to us both sides of this important, timely, and necessary conversation. Just a quick note that this conversation will be recorded and parts of it may be shared on social media. So just be aware of that. You can always share your thoughts and views with us. How are we doing? Is this debate the right one? What do you make of what people are saying? Just tweet us. We are at Doha Debates. So in a moment, I'm going to be introducing the first question. I'm going to be bringing in Julie and Kayandi to have a conversation and a debate with each other. Then we're going to move on to some audience questions and we'll wrap up the show hopefully in the next sort of 40 minutes. Okay, that's enough of me waffling on. It's time to begin. So let's move on to today's topic. We're thinking about cancel culture and specifically asking the question, is it mob rule or citizen justice? What is the point, utility? Is it even fit for purpose? This idea of cancel culture. And helping me to understand this and debate either side, I'm joined by Julie Bindel, a feminist activist, broadcaster, and the author of Feminism for Women, The Real Route to Liberation. And Kayandi Andrews, professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University and the author of The New Age of Empire, How Racism and Colonialism Still Rule the World. Okay, it's time to get stuck in. Kayandi Andrews, I want to come to you first. In about a minute, can you tell me and try and answer the question, that central question, is cancel culture citizen justice or mob rule? Over to you.
Hi. Thanks for that introduction as well. And I think the key thing to think about is cancel culture isn't really a thing, right? Like what we're talking about an age where you have people, minorities, women, people working class, different gender, different people who didn't usually have a voice now have a voice because of things like social media, etc. And they're saying they don't like this and they don't like that. And the people in power who previously, let's be honest, could just do what they like, could go on mainstream TV and say what they like, could write in Broad Street in newspapers and say what they like, without any challenge, and now feeling this challenge and then getting upset. Because I think the key thing is there is a line here about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. And what's changed now is because you do have a more democratic public space, people are saying, actually, no, it's not acceptable to have blackface, or it's not acceptable to be anti-gay, or it's not acceptable to do these things. And the people who previously had been quite, protected in their bubbles of privilege are now screaming cancel culture when there's consequences for their actions. So no, it's not mob justice at all. Cancel culture is a made-up thing, usually by people on the right, but not just people on the right, but from people in the establishment who have previously been unchallenged and now being challenged and are calling foul. But it's a complete illusion and to believe there is such thing as cancel culture that is somehow harming the debate.
Thank you so much. Julie, over to you. I know you think differently. Tell me why.
Well, I don't think it's either cancel culture or mob rule. I think it's largely, the thing I'm concerned about as a left-wing feminist and lesbian who's campaigned all of my adult life against male violence. To me, it's about who gets to speak and who doesn't. And it's about a group of misogynistic men. And this is no conspiracy theory. I mean, they're from every single walk of life. They're from the right, they're from the left, they're so-called progressives, or they may well be openly racist and sexist, who have decided that feminists are pretty much to blame for everything, are the worst bigots and fascists on the planet, all of a sudden we've gone from being left-wing, socialist, social justice campaigners to the worst people that walk the planet. And in my view, the bit of so-called cancel culture that I'm concerned about, which is actually a misogynistic silencing of feminists, comes from men that hate the fact that women are pointing out their sexism, their behaviour, whether it's their use of pornography or their sexual exploitation of women and their mass kind of celebration of the sex trade, of stripping, of lap dance clubs, of anything that's bad for women. And so the way that they get around their misogyny, if they're on the left, but they still hate women and hate feminism, is to scream turf and swerve, and to point the finger at women who are actually trying to curb men's their belief that they have an inherent right to do what they wish with women.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to take just a moment, just take a beat, take a step and a breath. You both have used important words, important arguments, and I just want to make sure that we're on the same page as we move forward. So this is the part where I'm going to ask you both in earnest, and with this idea of respectful understanding, to try and explain to me in a sentence or two what the other person's view is. And by doing so, we are building understanding in order to move forward. So, Kayendi, perhaps with you first, I just want to make sure that you can summarize Julie's argument as accurately as possible in 1 or 2 sentences.
I mean, so I think what Julie's saying is that there are certainly misogynistic men out there who are using platforms, and as they have always done, I think it's not necessarily a new thing, but there certainly are misogynistic men out there who are abusing certain terms, things like turf, using the radical feminists, people who don't know, who are kind of abusing that social justice language to kind of attack women and to pursue a misogynistic agenda, I would say is what Julie's trying to say.
Yeah, Julie, is that a fair assessment of what you're trying to get across?
Yes, it is, and I would summarise Kayendi's argument like this. In fact, I agree with everything that he says, apart from the fact that he referred to cancel culture as an illusion. Tell that to the women that have lost their jobs and been pushed out of their university courses, etc. But I absolutely agree that there is, as he says, that it is time now that people will call out racism and other forms of bigotry and prejudice that they didn't have the opportunity to do before. I just think that he completely ignores what's been happening to women who've been targeted by this so-called cancel culture that I wouldn't refer to as cancel culture.
Before we get into that, and believe me, I've made time, we'll get into it. Kayendi, is that a fair assessment of what you're trying to get across?
Yeah, I think so, and I think the key thing here is, what are we saying when we say cancel culture? I think even Julie agrees. It's not. None of these things we're talking about, and even the attacks against women, which of course happen, and of course there's misogyny, and I'm not saying that's not the case. I say it's not new, and it's not this thing called cancel culture. I think that's probably where the debate is. What is it? Is it different? Is it new? But yeah, I think that was a relatively good summary of my points.
Look at that. We're all getting along amicably. Now, to tear you up and divide you all into bits, we've spoken about the what is cancel culture. What about the who? The first question that I want to ask both of you, and really I'm just throwing to you this idea. I'd love to hear your response and your discussion, as will all of the other folks tuning in to this Doha Debates Twitter Spaces on cancel culture, is when we talk about cancel culture, we're talking about someone. Who do you believe is most often doing the cancelling, and who is getting cancelled, right? And I'd like to invite you both to discuss this, because we're not cancelling ideas, as you both have mentioned. These are people. So I'd just like to offer that up as a point of discussion between the two of you. Julie, if you go first.
Well, in terms of who's getting cancelled, I think that you have to look at the fact that David Starkey, for example, has been criticised, rightly so, for his racism. as differently from those left-wing feminists that have been monstered and often defamed for wrongthink, for the kind of religious zealotry that they've disobeyed of kind of whether it's transgender activism in its extreme form or the whole pro-prostitution, sex work is work nonsense, in my view, that you can't actually put them both in the same camp. They're not the same cultural norm, in my view. So, yes, it's absolutely right and fair that those with bigoted views are called out for their bigoted views. It's not right and fair that there's a new orthodoxy, which is as I say, like a new religion, which has invaded liberal culture, that disallows anyone to have a discussion or a debate about it, lest they are under threat for losing their job, as I say, or their position in universities, or their reputation. So this is the problem that I have, because as many times as I've been invited to join the Free Speech Union, for example, I have refused to do so, because I don't think that free speech should be an absolute right. I think that there should be reasonable restriction on free speech. There always will be, there always has been. And I don't think it's okay to actually have this argument based on whether you're pro free speech or not. I think it's about who gets to speak and who is prevented from speaking. And at the moment, what I'm seeing is a tidal wave of misogyny hitting women, including black lesbians and those that have fought all their lives to end oppression, when that vitriol surely should be in a reasonable and controlled form be going to those that are causing real harm to those groups that suffer and experience institutionalized prejudice and discrimination.
But yeah, no, I think this is where we'll have a point of disagreement, right? The question here is obviously the start. I mean, it's kind of obvious now, hopefully, that David Starkey is not cancelling. You just should never have been given a platform in the first place. And you have to wonder why someone whose comments that go back all the way to 2011 with the riots, the whites have become black. I mean, that should have disqualified him from the BBC a long time ago. So you have to ask the question why that even happens in the first place. So someone like him is not being cancelled; they're just rightly not being given a platform they shouldn't have been given in the first place. But the question then goes to, we're talking about trans rights, for example. Who is it that should decide what is and what isn't acceptable? And it isn't. Look, there certainly are misogynistic men using this to attack women, no doubt about it. But it's simply not the case. That's just it. That's the only people who complain. The term TERF does not come from misogynistic men. Like, it has a whole history in social justice. And the question is who has the right to define? And if you are saying things like trans women aren't women, for example, who decides whether that's a statement that's acceptable or not? It shouldn't be me. I'm not going to say I should decide. It should be a much more democratic space for it. And I think what you're seeing there's lots of people, trans activists, other feminist activists, who are saying actually some of this language is really harmful, it is really hurtful, it doesn't help. And actually, if you look at the actual statutory framework in the UK, if you look at the mainstream norms, it's basically impossible to argue that they're really pro-trans and all these feminists are being terribly treated. The fact is, feminism is a big thing. It's a broad church, and there's lots of feminists who would deeply disagree with what Julie just said. And the question is, where do we draw that line, and how do we decide it? I would submit it certainly shouldn't be me or Julie drawing that line. It should be about the people who are affected by these comments.
Well, I do. I mean, as a woman, I have a stake in speaking about this, because the term woman is already taken, and we have sex-based rights because feminists fought for them. And so when there's a clash of rights coming from the proposal for men to be able to self-identify as women and invade all our spaces that we need in order to protect ourselves or recover from male violence, I do have a right to speak about it. I do have a stake in it. And so I think that what we need to do, and I agree with you, by the way, about David Starkey, what the hell was the BBC doing, commissioning him as though he is a kind of mainstream voice when clearly he's a racist. But the problem I have, as I've said, is it's about who gets to speak, who is punished, who is unduly punished for wrongthink and for trying to debate and discuss in a reasonable manner issues that do conflict with the issues that we as feminists fight for.
Yeah, but I think this is the question. Can I suggest Julia a question? Who is this person? Because, like, Julia, you have a platform. You're speaking. People are speaking. J.K. Rowling often comes up in these debates. She's speaking. Like, I'm not sure who is this person who are being shot. I think that the voices are quite strongly coming through.
But the problem is, I mean, of course I'm speaking, and of course I write about these things. I'm a journalist, that's my job. And I'm lucky enough to have got to a stage in my life, although this kind of monstering of me on particular issues has been going on for nearly 2 decades. But I'm at a stage in my life where I can speak, where I do have enough people willing to listen to me, where there is still a publisher willing to publish my books and outlets publishing my work. But that doesn't mean to say that my life hasn't been made hell at times because of the way that I've been attacked and defamed. But that's irrelevant. I'm irrelevant because I do get to speak, despite the fact that I'm constantly deplatformed. I'm not talking about no platforming. It's a very important distinction. I'm talking about being invited by groups of students or feminists or wherever, and then being publicly disinvited because there's a huge fuss made, excuse me, by people saying that I'm too bigoted to be able to speak, including about being a working class lesbian. So that's my experience is in a sense irrelevant, because what's more relevant are the thousands and thousands of women that don't have my privilege and my platform, that have been silenced. They come to me and to other women that are in the public eye, telling me constantly that they daren't speak out. Excuse me, in their feminist groups, at school, at work, in college. And they say that if they were to do this, they'd be expelled from their social group, thrown out of the feminist society, or their lives would be made a misery. And it's for those women and some men that I continue to speak out. It's just not good enough saying, but you still get to speak. That's like saying of an abused woman, but she still stayed, she didn't leave him.
Can
No,
I maybe,
jump
sorry,
in.
I just, hi, folks. I'm not sure if the mic cancelled. I was just getting to explain exactly what our poll results were in a recent contribution that we asked our audience to make on cancel culture. So we asked the question, do you ever self-censor yourself because you're worried that sharing your opinion may get you cancelled? 34% of those who responded to our poll said always, 39% said sometimes, and then rarely and never both received about 13%. So it's clear that a lot of people, certainly those who responded to this, find it challenging to express themselves fully online because they're so worried about the repercussions. Asking then, do you think cancelling is an effective form of accountability? Only 15% said yes. The majority of people, 47%, said sometimes, and 37% said no, never. So these are really important facts that we're learning, that the general public don't necessarily think that cancel culture is working for the people all the time. Certainly, it's dangerous, right? If young people are censoring themselves because they're worried about how they're going to be perceived. Candy, I want to come to you first on that.
Well, no, I think partly this is about this. The whole debate about what cancel culture has become such a thing that people are now wary of it. Even though, again, it'll be difficult to find all these people who have been cancelled because it doesn't actually really happen, right? And I think that's part of what people are responding to. The second thing I would say is, look, things change and our norms change. So if you've gone back in the 50s, there's certain things like when it was perfectly fine to use the terms like coloured, you could express really racist views openly. And there's a shift when people come into the country and make art and make resistance and activism, and then you can't do that. And if you done a poll in the 60s and said, do you feel you have to self-censor yourself because of racism? People would have said, of course we do. Do you feel worried about are you going to get kicked out of your social circle because you're anti-immigration? Hopefully people would have said yes. Because when things change, there is an uncomfortable moment, and I think on some of these issues, things like particularly trans issues, it's an issue that's come to the surface that we haven't necessarily thought about before, and maybe there does need to be a reset of where we are. And again, it's not for me to say where that reset is, but just because people are uncomfortable with having to rethink their positions, that doesn't mean that's a problem. That can actually be a very, very good thing.
Julie, what do you make of that? I mean, it goes on and on. I can give you stats on a recent YouGov poll as well, right? So in Britain, in 2021, a recent poll found 57% of British people saying that they felt like at least sometimes they had to stop themselves from expressing their opinion online due to fear of a negative reaction. Now, this could be anything from being fired to being harassed to being doxxed. I mean, what does this tell us?
I mean, excuse me, Candy seems to be denying that there is any kind of issue that really is focusing on women or feminists that speak out about male violence and abuse. And he seems to be denying that that's a problem in any way, except for to silence people's bigotry. And I mean, of course, I agree. I don't want men who think it's great fun to rape or to regularly consume misogynistic porn, to be shouting about that in the street to others in public. Of course, I want to silence their views and I want them to change their views. But we do this when we're talking about dangerous or harmful speech. I'm speaking about something that he seems to be insisting is just a figment of women's imagination, which is the targeting and harassment. And I'm talking about serious harassment, bullying of feminists for wrongthink about particular issues, where they are called bigots, Nazis, fascists for saying reasonable things. And you just have to look at Kathleen Stock, you have to look at Rosella, you have to look at Raquel Rosario Sanchez, who say we have the right to single-sex spaces. We have the right to question whether or not self-identification for men who choose to define as women, we have the right to say that sex offenders of that nature should not be amongst the most vulnerable women, those in prison. And for that, just for those reasonable statements, and it's all on record, these women are called Nazis, bigots, TERFs, and told to shut the fuck up and threatened with rape, with violence. You cannot possibly deny that that is happening.
I didn't deny that was happening. Obviously, anybody who's threatening abuse, that is a crime anyway. I think we could say that's actually, there are already laws against this and they should be enforced. And certainly that does happen. And but it's not new. It's not new, the idea that women would have rape threats put on them for their views, etc., etc. And it's appalling and abhorrent. Of course, those kind of things should go. But we're having a much broader conversation about cancel culture, and I think we can agree on that part of it. But I think there's a much bigger question here. And Julia, you keep saying feminists, but there's a broad section of feminists, and lots of feminists disagree with you. And this isn't a settled issue about single-sex spaces, and there's a debate, there's a discussion, and certainly people have the right to reject your view and say, I don't like it. They should be more polite. I agree. But as somebody who writes about racism and gets abuse all the time, like literally the terrible abuse all the time, I appreciate where you're coming from here, but I don't agree. I just don't accept that there is this big people are being shut down and cancelled, and for just these very, very plain reasonable views by everybody. That's not what's happening. There are people who have legitimate objections. There are certainly people who have illegitimate objections, but there are people who have legitimate objections who want to change the nature of that debate, and they should be allowed to do so without being without being lumped into the same category as people making rape threats. That's actually very, very different.
Julie,
absolutely right. They should be absolutely right. They should be allowed to speak out and not be lumped in with those that are threatening rape and death and violence, or those actually committing acts of violence. But it also should be recognised that this is not a tiny minority of women who've been targeted and harassed this way. And often when we ask, please show the evidence about the bigotry in the statement that you are now attacking this person for, such as J.K. Rowling, they can't come up with any evidence whatsoever. And I think that culture of misogyny, which thrives on Twitter in particular, has been legitimised and normalised, as has anti-Semitism and racism on social media.
Julie, I'd just like to come back on that before we move on to the next part of this discussion, to the audience kind of questions. Andrew Tate, who is TikTok famous and famous across social media for being a misogynist and condoning incredible, unpalatable views on women, he has been cancelled. He has been deplatformed. That's happened. J.K. Rowling is still able to tweet and go about expressing herself as she wishes. So what exactly is wrong with cancel culture when it works in this way? I mean, it seems to be working in favorably towards what you're saying. A misogynist was shut down, as they should have been, and a person who is a trans exclusionary feminist, in that turf sense, is allowed to continue to present her views. So didn't cancelling work?
Well, two things. First of all, Andrew Tate is a vile misogynist. J.K. Rowling is a charitable giver, a feminist, a person who believes in equality and justice for all. That's the difference I think we're looking at.
Andy, do you want to come in on that? I mean, should it be one rule for one type of hateful speech and another for another? I mean, I genuinely want to know if all forms of bigoted speech should be treated the same when it comes to cancel culture.
No, I think it's a good example to say that actually it's not cancel culture. It's just there's an exception. There is a broad exception that there is some speech which is not acceptable. For example, anti-Semitism. If you're anti-Semitic, you're going to get, you will not be allowed on these platforms. Racism, misogyny in this case, right? Where we say there's lines to draw. And there's a line being drawn. Andrew Tate has crossed that line. Now, interestingly, it is because of largely, I would say, because of the activism and protests and feminists and movements that have drawn that line and said people like Andrew Tate shouldn't be on social media. So that's not cancel culture. That's just the thing we already have now, which is there is acceptable speech, and if you cross that line, you will not be allowed on mainstream platforms. Just being employed. And I think the difference with J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling, she has views which people find objectionable, but she's not violently putting them forward. She's not open. That's not our whole platform. It is a different case, right? And so yeah, that's what I'm saying. Cancel culture. If cancel culture existed in the way that we're told it was existed, J.K. Rowling would also have lost her platform. But actually, you find this doesn't happen in these cases.
Can I ask what hateful speech Rowling has ever spouted? Because they're kind of they're two sides of the same coin going on with Rowling and with Andrew Tate. And I'm really scratching my head, desperately looking for what analogous hate speech has been spouted by Rowling. Can somebody help me here?
No, I think that's the difference. I don't think there is clear hate speech from Andrew Tate, which is why he's been banned. With J.K. Rowling, she puts forward views on trans women, which are people object. Like you could say they're controversial. People object to them. They cause people offense. But that is different to hate speech.
Does she deserve? But the question, the central question, and what I'm trying to get at, folks, before we move on to a question from our audience is, I'm not clearer. Is it citizen justice or mob rule? Are we agreeing that cancel culture is still relevant and necessary, or is it something that we need to leave behind and move on with our lives?
Well, I mean, I'm saying it doesn't exist. I think it's not a real thing. Because my point is that actually, this is something. The concept of cancel culture is something which has been made up by the right, not just the right, to shut down legitimate debate and legitimate discussion. Like, for example, J.K. Rowling should be challenged on her views if people feel there should be a right to challenge, and they shouldn't be shut down and called. Actually, no, you shouldn't be doing. No, let them challenge it. That's what actually is happening.
What if the form of the natural challenge? What if, like, you don't get to decide, nor do I, nor does anybody, how someone chooses to phrase or attack or present their views when they're cancelling someone, right? So what if that is actually, someone like J.K. Rowling, what if that amounts to 100,000 people telling you that you should, you don't deserve to have a voice, you're a terrible human being, you don't deserve to be here, and all this sort of stuff. I mean, the vitriol can sometimes be the point, right? So Julie, just to come to you before we move on, is it an effective form of citizen justice, or does it feel more like mob rule? I mean, you had lunch with J.K. Rowling last week, right, or a few weeks ago. I mean, what did she say?
Well, that was a private conversation, and I don't think she mentioned either citizen justice or mob rule. None of us did, because that's not the way that we would frame the argument. It's about who gets to speak, who gets silenced, and who's bullied out of expressing their views and ideas. And I think not because I don't use the term cancel culture, it's a little bit difficult to argue for or against its existence. What I would say is if you took a male counterpart to Rowling, if you took a male counterpart to me, you see how much less bullying the male counterpart gets for expressing similar views than do women. It's as simple as that.
I mean,
Mohammed,
just to come in here, just to come in here. You know how much abuse and vitriol I get on social media all the time, all the time. This is not.
well,
This is.
tell me.
I mean, it's
Like,
constant.
tell
I mean,
me.
I have had death threats. I've been told to leave the country. I've been all kinds of stuff. Every time I'm on TV, I get this abuse. This is not. It's not just for. It's not just for women. It's not just. It's across the board. You're finding that you have this, and this is something actually as a black person you just kind of get used to. Like if you're going to talk about racism, this is what is going to happen, right? Is you're going to get this stuff you have to do with it, unfortunately.
Absolutely,
Yeah, but
absolutely agree.
toxic,
No,
isn't it?
I absolutely agree. That's why I said male counterpart. I mean, if you had, a 60-year-old white male journalist saying the same things that I do, you would see how much less vitriol, abuse, and threats he gets than do I. So the word counterpart there is crucial.
Okay, I think we're getting somewhere with this. Mostly, what I'm hearing from both of you is that cancel culture doesn't exist, and I should mind my own business. But let's move on to some questions from the audience. Joining us now is Mohammed Wase, who is part of our Doha Debates Ambassador program. It's a fantastic program. You can find out more about it on our website, dohadebates.com. It's basically a way for young activists and change makers to all connect and be better at activism and change making. So I'm really excited to have Mohammed Wase, who is a Doha Debates ambassador, ask a question. So Mohammed, can I get you in on this? What is your question and who is it for first, please?
Hi, Nelufar. Thank you. My question is for both guests, actually. So, what do you guys think? Is it the responsibility of social media sites to intervene in cancel culture, to either protect it or address it? I'd just like to know your thoughts.
Julie, you go first.
As Kendi said, we've got laws and they should be implemented, and I think that should apply, albeit with some practical difficulties, to the internet, to social media. But it is a bit like the Wild West, isn't it? So it's a nightmare to police. I do think, however, that there is a big difference in the way that, for example, woman-hating sentiments are dealt with on Twitter than robust feminist arguments. And you can see who has their accounts suspended and for what, compared to those really vile death and rape threats that are often left, despite all of the reports from those that are distressed and appalled by such tweets, and they're left often unchecked, and there's a huge difference. It would be interesting to see, wouldn't it, for somebody to do their doctoral thesis on who gets banned or suspended from Twitter and for what, as opposed to those that are left to fight their good fight.
I think that's that social media has to do a lot better. The companies do a lot better at censoring the stuff that has to be censored: hateful speech, racist speech, sexist speech, misogynistic speech, threats, things like that. I mean, I can't remember what it was, but I reported something. It was so vile, and then Twitter didn't take it down, and I had to retweet. I had to retweet it and show everybody, and they're like, "Well," and it still never came down. So there's clearly something going wrong with the way that things are getting filled out, and people who are getting suspended. But it should be anything hateful, any threats, anything like that. Again, there are laws against this. Social media companies have need to do a much better job to make sure that has no space on their platforms, and to ban people like Andrew Tate, who are obviously very obviously repeat offenders.
Wase, what do you make of that answer?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It actually brings me to another thought, where I was thinking, who exactly decides what is bigoted and what is not? Is it a game of numbers, whether it's citizen journalism or mob rule? Both of those terms, they're directly affiliated with number of people who follow them. So say if the majority of people believe something is bigoted and a minority of people don't, but the minority people are right, then what do social media sites do then? It's just a question I ponder over. So are we going with what the majority thinks? Is morality dictated by numbers, or is it dictated by something else? That's something I'm so confused about.
I've got to come to you guys for this one. This is a fantastic question. Well done. Julie, is it quantity?
Well, it shouldn't be. I mean, we make laws and often draft policy and implement policy for the majority. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes it's the minority. But what we certainly should be doing is looking at the law. And those of us that work in what I would call progressive law reform, that campaign to change or implement new laws, we should look to the law as either useful, as it is, as it, for example, puts a limit on speech and looks at what's harmful, potentially dangerous, and incitement to violence. And then we should make sure that those laws are implemented, not introduce new laws, but maybe change laws if we think that they're not working to benefit those that are institutionally oppressed, for example, as opposed to having some completely made up individualistic neoliberal identity that they've just, decided on that day.
No, I think it's dangerous to say it's the majority, because the majority could be wrong, right? Like the crowds aren't always right on these things. But I think as somebody who gets a lot of abuse, it's not that complicated, honestly. Like, there's stuff I report stuff which is threatening, which uses racial slurs, which is obviously hateful speech. It really isn't that complicated. When you actually look at it and you see the comments, it's not that difficult to discern which is which.
Okay, let's move on to Nicholas Kamanzi, who's also a Doha Debates ambassador. What's your question? Nicholas, are you there? Yeah, there you are. What's your question?
Yes, thanks, Nelufar. Well, my question goes to both speakers. And for many young people, cancellation is the worst punishment imaginable, because rejection by their peer groups is their biggest fear. What is your approach to using social media in a way that reduces harm caused by cancel culture?
Kayandi, let's come to you first on that.
I think this is where, like, cancel culture is a big area. Like, what are we talking about? Kids who are being bullied on social media? I think that's a different issue to the broader thing about cancel culture. And then I think you have to then think, it's complicated, right? This is not just a social media problem. And I think sometimes we imagine these things are new and just social media. People being bullied and isolated in their friends groups has been happening since they've been people, right? And so it isn't like, you can't just say it's just the responsibility of groups to do this. They've tweeted to do this to make sure people aren't getting cancelled. That's a much bigger question, and I think we have to take a much bigger responsibility for that as citizens more generally. But certainly, again, there are clear instances where social media companies can do better to make sure that young people aren't being, clearly abused and using their platforms to be abused. And again, I would say those things already exist, and we already know what they should be doing. This needs to be doing it better, I think.
Julie?
I agree. I have nothing to add.
Well, don't know what to say about that. I wasn't expecting everyone to be so congenial. But here we are, like, with the last couple of minutes of the conversation, this Doha Debates on Twitter Spaces chat on cancel culture, whether it's citizen justice or mob rule. And I'd really like to engage with you, Kayandi and Julie, on the same spirit as we started with, trying to understand one thing. I want to know if there was a moment in this conversation so far where your opponent, the person who you're arguing or debating against, was there one thing that they said that made you pause or that made you think differently? I'm going to put you on the spot, Kayandi. I'm going to come to you first. But was there something that Julie said that made you pause or think differently? And then Julie, I'll come to you.
I think the idea that, having experienced a lot anyway, I can see the point that, when you have views that people don't object to and disagreeable, you can get a lot of abuse and vitriol, and that can be very hurtful. It really does. It does have a big impact, and I think we do need to factor that in when we're having this discussion. I think that's an important point to make.
It sounds almost like you believe that cancel culture exists there.
No, but I would say it's not cancel culture. People being on social media, people be for a long time. Like,
I'm just trying to trip you up there. Yes, absolutely understand your perspective. Julie, I want to come to you. Was there a single moment when, in anything that Kayandi said, that made you pause at least or think differently about this issue?
Well, lots of it. What Kayandi said about, why some of these clowns like Starkey ever get, commissioned to appear on the BBC as some kind of symbol of Britishness. he's absolutely right. It's totally outrageous, some of the things that we let pass and that we don't protest. Maybe it's a creeping normalization that we should all keep an eye on, as opposed to something very immediate that social media has now kind of schooled us into reacting to, a very sort of quick reaction. And I think that we should actually ponder on these things much more carefully, take our time, and think about what it all really means for our society.
I feel like we've really come together on this, and at the end of this 45-minute conversation, this Doha Debates on Twitter Spaces, I feel like we've come to a place where we understand that understanding has to be the objective. This cannot be an us versus them, a right versus wrong, a righteous and unrighteous debate. And speaking to both of you and hearing the wonderful questions from Mohammed and Nicholas, it's proving to me that a beat, a step, and a pause is more important than being right when it comes to cancel culture. And really, that's the time that we have allotted to this conversation. I will be back in about a week's time. I'm hoping you wonderful people that have joined us now join us again. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence with former Google engineer Blake Lemoine and Dex Hunter Torek from the Facebook owner Meta's Oversight Board. I will see you guys then. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.